Okay, today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Darwin's points of natural selection. Sometimes we also call it survival of the fittest. So, Charles Darwin developed the theory of evolution through a process called natural selection. This process of natural selection has 5 main principles. Number 1, population has variations. That means everybody's not just exactly alike. There's some variations. Or diversity. So some variations are favorable. Some things make it more likely to survive, and then some variations will make you less likely to survive. More offspring are produced and can survive. Think about sea turtles. They lay hundreds of eggs on the beach, and then as they hatch, only maybe a handful of those end up surviving to adulthood. Those who survive have the favorable traits. Well, that's going to be the sea turtle that can find the ocean quicker after it hatches, the one that can swim faster, the one who knows the difference between jellyfish and plastic bags. So the ones with favorable traits, the faster swimmers, are going to be the ones who are going to survive longer, and then they're going to pass those favorable traits on to their next generation. So the population will change over time. So back to our sea turtles. Think about it. If you have sea turtles who have maybe shorter fins and they can't swim as fast, they're going to be more likely to be eaten. So they're not going to pass that short fin trait along. And the sea turtles with the longer fins, they're going to survive. They're going to be more likely to survive, and they're going to have offspring that are going to have that trait of longer, stronger fins. So then they're going to have offspring that are going to pass. They're going to have that trait of longer, stronger fins. They're going to have babies, and they're going to pass that trait along to their babies. And eventually you're going to end up with more and more sea turtles with longer, stronger fins because they're more likely to survive. Okay. Usually when we think of natural selection, we think about the giraffe example. Okay. You have short-necked giraffes and giraffes with longer necks. Well, as all the leaves at the bottom of the trees get eaten up, then those short-necked giraffes are going to starve. The ones that are going to survive are the ones that can reach the leaves at the top of the trees. Okay, so they have the longer necks. They're going to pass that trait of longer necks on to their babies. We're going to have babies and pass that trait along. So that's what's meant by natural selection. Okay, so we're going to read the following situation, and we're going to identify the 5 points of Darwin's natural selection in this situation. It says there are 2 types of worms. Worms that eat at night, nocturnal worms, and worms that eat during the day, or diurnal. Birds eat during the day and seem to be eating only the diurnal worms. The nocturnal worms are in their burrows during this time. Each spring, when the worms reproduce, they have about 500 babies. But only 100 of these 500 ever become old enough to reproduce. Okay. So if only the ones that are able to reproduce are going to pass those traits on. So what worm has natural selection selected against? Well, it's selecting against those that are getting eaten by the birds during the day. So it's selecting against the diurnal worms. And it's going to be selecting for those worms that are nocturnal because they're safe in their burrows during the day when the birds are out eating. So then they can come out at night and eat safely. They're going to survive, and they're going to pass their traits of being nocturnal on to their offspring. Okay. So population has variation. So that point is there are diurnal worms and nocturnal worms. So that's the variation. So we have diurnal worms and nocturnal worms. Okay. Some variations are favorable. Well, in this case, being nocturnal would be the favorable variation. So nocturnal. It's favorable. Because they're not out. They don't have to go out to hunt food during the day and risk getting eaten by birds. More offspring are produced and survive. Well, they have 500 babies, 100 survive. So 500 offspring. With only about 100 surviving. So those that survive have favorable traits. Well, yes, that's going to be the nocturnal. Nocturnal survive. A population will change over time. Well, if all of the birds, or maybe say a dozen of the diurnal worms survive, well, they might end up having 1,200 babies. But then a whole 100 of those nocturnal worms survive, and then they're going to have 10,000 babies. So eventually we're going to end up with a population that is almost all nocturnal, because the very few of the diurnal worms are going to survive to have offspring, and more of the nocturnal ones are going to survive. So eventually the population will shift to nocturnal. Becomes more nocturnal. Okay, becomes more nocturnal. Now think about it. It becomes more nocturnal. But what if maybe an invasive species comes in? Maybe it's a bird that feeds on worms at night. If that bird that feeds on worms, that invasive species, a bird that feeds on worms at night comes in, this is on your paper, we're just talking about this one, just making us think a little bit. If we get an invasive species that is a bird that feeds on worms at night, what do you think might happen? All of a sudden, more and more of these nocturnal worms are getting eaten. Fewer and fewer are surviving to pass that trait on. So we'll get a shift back to maybe a more even diurnal nocturnal ratio, or it might even switch to, depending on how aggressive this invasive species is, it could even switch back to the diurnal worms. And it could maybe even lead to extinction of those worms. So that's why invasive species can be dangerous. They throw off that natural selection. And I'll look a little bit at this next one with you, and then I'm going to let you do the others on your own. Okay, so there are 3 types of polar bears. One with thick coats, one with thin coats, and one with medium coats. Okay. It is fall, soon to be winter. The temperatures are dropping rapidly. So what are the bears going to need to stay warm? The bears must be kept warm or they will freeze to death. Many of the bears have had approximately 2 cubs each, but due to the extreme temperatures, many mothers only have 1 cub left. So what bear will naturally be selected against? Okay, well, the ones that can't keep warm. So if they can't, which ones would be the ones that can't keep warm? Well, most likely it's going to be selecting against those with a thin coat, because they're going to get colder and be more likely to freeze. And it's going to be selecting more for the ones with the warmest coat. Okay, so what are our variations? Our variations would be coat thickness, and which ones are going to be more favorable. More favorable would be those who can be warmer. So the thickest coat would be the most favorable, but the medium coat would be more favorable than the thin coat. And they usually have about 2 babies with maybe 1 surviving. And what would be the favorable traits you think those survivors are going to have? And how do you think that population is going to change over time? So finish this one, and there's a couple more examples over on the next page. Give them a try, and I hope that helps. Thanks. Bye-bye.